More than 2,000 years ago, the ancient world was changing rapidly. Kingdoms were rising, empires were expanding, and powerful rulers were shaping the future of civilizations. One of the most ambitious rulers in history was Alexander the Great. Born in 356 BCE in Macedonia, Alexander was trained from a young age to become a leader. His father, Philip II of Macedon, had already built a powerful army and begun expanding Macedonian influence across Greece. Alexander was not only trained in warfare but also in philosophy and science. His teacher was the famous Greek philosopher Aristotle. Aristotle taught him about logic, science, geography, and the cultures of different civilizations. These teachings shaped Alexander's vision of the world. Unlike many conquerors who only cared about power and territory, Alexander dreamed of creating a world where cultures, ideas, and knowledge could travel freely. By the age of 30, Alexander had conquered one of the largest empires in ancient history. His army marched through Greece, Egypt, Persia, and parts of India. During his campaign in Egypt in 331 BCE, Alexander decided to build a new city on the Mediterranean coast. He personally chose the location and designed the city plan. This city would later become one of the most famous cities in history. It was called Alexandria. Alexander imagined Alexandria as more than just a trading port or military base. He wanted it to become a meeting place for cultures from all over the world. However, Alexander died unexpectedly in 323 BCE at the young age of 32. His empire was divided among his generals. But the dream of Alexandria did not die with him. One of his most loyal generals decided to turn Alexander's vision into reality. His name was Ptolemy Soter. After Alexander's death, Ptolemy took control of Egypt and established the Ptolemaic dynasty. Ptolemy understood something very important about power. Military strength could build an empire. But knowledge could sustain it for centuries. He wanted Alexandria to become the intellectual capital of the ancient world. Instead of focusing only on armies and wars, Ptolemy invested in scholars, philosophers, scientists, and artists. He ordered the construction of a great institution dedicated to learning. This institution became known as the Library of Alexandria. But the library was not simply a room full of books. It was part of a much larger research center called the Mouseion of Alexandria. The Mouseion functioned like the world's first university. Scholars from across the Mediterranean came to live and work there. The state provided them with housing, food, and salaries. Their only responsibility was to study, teach, and expand human knowledge. In many ways, the Library of Alexandria was the first great research institute in human history. The rulers of Alexandria had an extraordinary goal. They wanted to collect every piece of knowledge ever written. To achieve this, they developed a remarkable system. Every ship arriving at the port of Alexandria was carefully inspected. If the ship carried books or scrolls, the authorities took them to the library. Professional scribes copied the texts by hand. The copies were returned to the ship owners. But the originals were kept in the library. This policy allowed the library to grow rapidly. Scrolls from Greece, Egypt, Persia, India, and Mesopotamia began filling its shelves. Ancient medical texts, philosophical works, poetry, mathematics, astronomy, geography, religious writings, historical records. Within a few generations, the Library of Alexandria had become the largest collection of written knowledge in the world. Historians believe it may have contained between 400,000 and 700,000 scrolls. For the ancient world, this was an unimaginable number. The library was not just a place to store information. It was a place where knowledge from different civilizations could meet and influence each other. The great scholars of Alexandria. Because of the library's reputation, the greatest minds of the ancient world traveled to Alexandria. One of the most famous scholars was Euclid. Euclid wrote a mathematical masterpiece called Elements. This book organized the principles of geometry into a logical system. For more than 2,000 years, Elements remained one of the most important mathematics textbooks ever written. Another brilliant scholar was Eratosthenes. Eratosthenes achieved something astonishing. He calculated the circumference of the Earth. Using shadows from two different cities and simple geometry, he estimated the Earth's size with remarkable accuracy. His calculation was only a few % different from modern measurements. This discovery proved that ancient scholars had a deep understanding of mathematics and astronomy. Another important figure was Archimedes. Although Archimedes lived in the city of Syracuse, his writings were studied and preserved in Alexandria. His discoveries in physics and engineering later influenced science for centuries. The library was not simply preserving knowledge. It was creating discoveries that shaped the future of science. While the library represented the intellectual power of Alexandria, another structure symbolized its physical greatness. Near the harbor stood the legendary lighthouse of Alexandria. This massive tower stood more than 100 meters tall and guided ships safely into the harbor. It was considered one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. The lighthouse represented something deeper than navigation. It symbolized the city itself. Alexandria had become a beacon of knowledge and culture. Scholars traveled thousands of miles to study there. Merchants brought ideas along with goods. Writers and historians documented the achievements of past civilizations. For several centuries, Alexandria stood as the intellectual capital of the ancient world. But great centers of knowledge often become targets during times of war and political change. And soon, the library would face a series of disasters that would slowly erase its greatness from history. For several centuries, Alexandria remained one of the most powerful intellectual centers in the world. Scholars, philosophers, mathematicians, and scientists continued to work in the great institution connected to the famous Library of Alexandria. However, history rarely allows greatness to last forever. After the early success of the Ptolemaic dynasty, political instability slowly began to grow in Egypt. Internal conflicts within the royal family weakened the government. Rival rulers fought for control, and the once powerful administration began to lose its authority. At the same time, a new superpower was rising in the Mediterranean world. The Roman Republic was expanding rapidly across Europe and the Middle East. Rome had already conquered many Greek territories and was becoming the dominant political force of the ancient world. Eventually, the struggles inside Egypt drew Rome into its affairs. In 48 BCE, one of the most famous Roman leaders in history arrived in Alexandria, Julius Caesar. Caesar had come to support one side of a political conflict between Egyptian rulers. But his arrival would lead to a series of events that may have caused the first major damage to the Great Library. During Caesar's stay in Alexandria, intense fighting broke out between Roman forces and local armies loyal to rival rulers. The battles spread across parts of the city, including the harbor area. According to some ancient historians, Caesar ordered his soldiers to burn enemy ships in the harbor to stop them from attacking Roman forces. But the fire quickly spread beyond the ships. Strong winds carried the flames toward warehouses near the port. Some scholars believe that these warehouses contained thousands of scrolls belonging to the library. Ancient writer Plutarch later mentioned that a large number of books were destroyed during this fire. However, historians still debate how much damage was actually done. Some believe the main library building survived. Others argue that a large portion of the collection may have been lost. What is certain is that this event marked the beginning of a long period of decline for Alexandria's great center of knowledge. Section 8, The Slow Decline of the Library. Even after the fire during Caesar's time, the library did not disappear immediately. Scholars continued working in Alexandria for many years. Roman rulers later supported intellectual activities in the city, and the institution survived in various forms. However, the political and cultural environment of the Mediterranean world was changing. The Roman Empire gradually replaced the older Greek traditions that had shaped the library. Economic problems also affected Alexandria. Maintaining a massive research institution required enormous resources. Without strong royal support, the library struggled to maintain its enormous collection of scrolls. Over time, some parts of the institution were abandoned. Other sections were neglected. Scrolls were lost, damaged, or moved to other cities. The once magnificent center of knowledge slowly began fading from its former glory. But another dramatic event in Alexandria would soon shock the ancient world. Centuries after the founding of the library, Alexandria was still home to many scholars and teachers. One of the most famous intellectual figures of this later period was Hypatia. Hypatia was born around 355 CE and became one of the most respected philosophers and mathematicians of her time. She taught philosophy, astronomy, and mathematics to students from many different regions. Her teachings were based on the intellectual traditions that had grown around the library and the Mausoleum of Alexandria. Hypatia was admired for her intelligence and wisdom. However, Alexandria during this period had become a city filled with religious and political tensions. Different groups were competing for influence and control. Unfortunately, Hypatia became caught in the middle of these conflicts. 415 CE, a violent mob attacked her in the streets of Alexandria. She was killed in a brutal and tragic event that shocked the entire ancient world. Many historians consider her death a symbolic moment in the decline of classical scholarship in Alexandria. It marked the end of an era when philosophy and scientific inquiry had flourished freely in the city. Section 10, The Final Mystery. Today, historians still debate the ultimate fate of the Library of Alexandria. Unlike many ancient buildings destroyed in a single dramatic event, the library seems to have disappeared gradually over several centuries. Some scholars believe that multiple disasters contributed to its destruction. The fires during Julius Caesar's conflict in Alexandria. Political decline under later rulers. Religious conflicts in the late Roman period. The gradual neglect of the institution. Because records from the ancient world are incomplete, historians cannot say exactly when the final scroll disappeared. What is certain is that the loss of the library represents one of the greatest cultural tragedies in human history. Hundreds of thousands of ancient texts vanished. Works from philosophers, scientists, and historians may have been lost forever. Knowledge from civilizations across the ancient world disappeared with them. Even today, historians wonder what incredible discoveries might have been preserved if the library had survived. Section 11, The Legacy of the Lost Library. Although the physical building no longer exists, the legacy of Alexandria's library still lives on. The idea that knowledge should be collected, preserved, and shared inspired the creation of modern libraries and universities. Institutions around the world now follow the same dream that inspired Ptolemy Soter more than 2,000 years ago. In 2002, a new library called Bibliotheca Alexandrina was opened in Alexandria. It was built near the site of the ancient library. This modern institution honors the memory of the greatest library of the ancient world. While the original scrolls may be lost, the spirit of learning and curiosity continues. The story of the Library of Alexandria reminds humanity of something important. Knowledge is one of the greatest treasures civilization can possess. And protecting that knowledge is one of our most important responsibilities.